This is Switzer Network News. Sarah Reed is a 2006 Switzer Fellow and an Associate Conservation Scientist with the Wildlife Conservation Society. She studies conservation development as a way to develop property by clustering homes and protecting or restoring ecological resources.
What we're looking at is really an alternative to the low-density development that's occurring far from metropolitan areas. This is called exurban development. It typically looks something like one house for every 10 to 40 acres. Instead of looking at a development property the way that we would now and sort of scattering the homes relatively evenly across that property so that everyone gets almost exactly the same amount of private land in their own individual parcel, instead we'd take that same property and we would first go out and look for the ecological resources that are valuable within that site. That might include special soils, waters, and habitats for plants and animals. And we would first set aside that land under some sort of protection. Most commonly it's protected under either a conservation easement or a restrictive covenant with a homeowners association. Then we'd take the same number of houses and we'd restrict their footprint to a subset of the site. And what this allows is not only for those homes to be clustered nearer to other homes and nearer to existing infrastructure, so closer to roads, sewers, and water lines. So it'll allow those residents to have all of those things that they're looking for when they purchase a home in an exurban landscape, including those views of open spaces and access to those open spaces without impacting them nearly as much and removing some of those very natural resources that brought them to those landscapes in the first place. It is less expensive typically for the developers to build it. And that's because you're clustering the housing, you're reducing the infrastructure that's required. And by infrastructure, I mean things like roads, driveways, sewer and water lines. And as far as the sales prices, there's not a lot of information about whether or not these homes are selling for more. There's early indication that they may have higher values relative to other homes in the landscape and they may appreciate a bit more, but that's one of those things we don't really know, and that's one of the things we're trying to figure out through these projects, is to understand what factors are contributing to make these developments successful, not only from an ecological perspective, but also from an economics perspective and from a social perspective. We are trying to target land use planners, so planners who are working typically for local jurisdictions like counties and municipalities. We're trying to reach developers who have the power to bring on designers and propose and actually accomplish projects. And we're talking to land trusts, because land trusts have the potential to bring the conservation expertise to the design of the project and also to hold the lands that are conserved as part of the conservation development project over time. What if we can just sort of solve the problem by having everyone live in higher density developments in the city at a larger scale? And what's really been happening to sort of confound that possible solution is that a lot of the growth that's happening in these rural areas are actually second homes. So at the same time that there's been this expansion of individual homes and then a contraction and a movement to greater density, there's also been an expansion in the number of homes per capita in the United States. And what we expect is that there's going to continue to be demand for that kind of development, and so what we want to do is try to shape it in a way that benefits conservation. And that has another benefit, which is that it helps us to provide land for conservation without cost, in the sense that it's just included as part of this design process. And that helps to solve another problem, which is that we just don't have enough funding available to purchase or protect all of the lands that we would need to stop the loss and fragmentation of wildlife habitat.
Here's a link where you can learn more about Sarah Reed's work with the Wildlife Conservation Society. This is Switzer Network News.